Somebody get this stray Juliating. Somebody get this stray out of my meeting.
900 employees, a company-wide meeting, and Grant Whitfield, billionaire CEO, just pointed at the only black intern in the room and told him to leave.
You deaf too? Get out.
Solomon stood up, but walked toward the stage, not the door.
Your system has 3 holes in it. I can prove it right now.
Then hack it, right now. Challenge accepted. The room is frozen in tinsitation.
Crack it, and I'll sign over my whole damn company. Remember you said that.
Solomon looked at him like a man who just sealed his own fate. He sat down, plugged in a black USB drive. 11 minutes later, every screen in that building went dark. What Grant Whitfield lost after that morning wasn't just his company. It was everything he thought made him untouchable. Oh, but wait. You don't even know who Solomon Mitchell really is yet. And trust me, neither did they. 3 weeks earlier, Solomon Mitchell stepped off a Greyhound bus in Arlington, Virginia, carrying everything he owned in a second-hand backpack. No car, no family waiting, no one expecting him. Just a printed email confirming a summer internship at Whitfield Digital Industries, the most powerful private cybersecurity firm in the country. The headquarters sat like a fortress of glass and steel just 4 miles from the Pentagon. Most people who worked there had spent years earning the right to walk through those doors. Ivy League degrees, government clearances, 6-figure signing bonuses. Solomon had none of that. What he had was a thrift store button-down, a laptop held together with tape, and a small black chess piece tucked in his pocket. A knight, carved from wood, smooth from years of being held. His foster mother Ruth gave it to him the year before she died. He was 15. She found it at a yard sale and pressed it into his palm and told him something he never forgot. The knight moves in an L, baby. Everyone else goes straight. The knight is the only piece on the board that jumps over walls. Ruth Mitchell was not his biological mother. She was a 61-year-old woman in East Baltimore who took in kids nobody wanted. She fed Solomon, read to him, and when she found out he could take apart a radio and put it back together at age 9, she walked 6 blocks to a pawn shop and bought him a $30 Raspberry Pi. That little circuit board changed his life. By 12, Solomon was writing his own code. By 14, he had built a functioning firewall for his middle school's network for free because no one would have paid a black kid from foster care to do it. By 16, he placed first in a national cybersecurity competition that drew contestants from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. He was the youngest, the only one without a college name behind him, and the only one the judges almost didn't let compete because they assumed his registration was a mistake. That competition put his name on a list, not a college list, but a government one. The Department of Defense had a program most people never heard of. They recruited young, they recruited quiet, and they recruited talent that the rest of the world had already decided to overlook. Solomon was exactly what they were looking for, but none of that was on his badge the morning he walked into Whitfield Digital Industries. The receptionist looked at his backpack, then at his face, and asked if he was there to deliver something. He said no, he was the new intern. She handed him a gray badge, the lowest tier in the building. Everyone around him wore silver or gold. The lobby alone told Solomon everything he needed to know about Grant Whitfield. A 40-foot digital wall displayed real-time cyber threat maps from 6 continents. Military-grade security scanners lined the entrance, and painted across the main wall in brushed steel letters was a quote: "If it can be built, it can be perfected. If it's perfected, it can't be broken." Grant Whitfield. Grant was 45, Stanford dropout, built his first firewall patent at 21, sold it for 8 figures, and used every dollar to create WDI. Now he held the single largest active cybersecurity contract with the Pentagon, a $2.1 billion deal to build and maintain Aegis 9, a national defense network designed to protect classified military infrastructure. Magazine covers lined the hallway. Grant on Forbes. Grant shaking hands with senators. Grant standing in front of the Pentagon with his arms crossed like a man who had already won every war worth fighting. Solomon walked past all of it without a word. He found his cubicle, tucked beside the supply closet, the farthest desk from the war room. He set down his backpack, opened his taped-up laptop, and placed the Black Knight chess piece on the corner of his desk, the only personal thing in his entire workspace. A voice came from behind him. "You're the new intern?" It was Troy Brennan, lead developer, gold badge, corner office, MIT class ring. He didn't wait for an answer. "Interns don't talk to me. Talk to the coffee machine." Solomon said nothing. He just looked at the war room door at the end of the hall, studied the keypad model on its lock, and sat down. Nobody in that building knew what had just walked through their front door. And by the time they found out, it would be too late. Solomon's first week at Whitfield Digital Industries taught him one thing. He was not there to learn. He was there to be invisible. Troy Brennan made sure of it. Every morning, Solomon's task list arrived by email. Not code reviews, not security audits, not system analysis. Coffee runs, cable sorting, reformatting old documentation that no one would ever read. One morning, the email simply said, "Conference room B needs new toner cartridges. Handle it." Solomon handled it. He handled all of it. Without complaint, without expression, without giving anyone a single reason to look at him twice. But every night, after the building emptied, he stayed at his cubicle, his taped-up laptop open, his black USB drive plugged in, and he studied Aegis 9. Not from the inside, because his gray badge gave him no access, but from every piece of public-facing architecture documentation, every API log he could reach, every packet of data that touched the outer perimeter of the system. He mapped the structure the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before cutting. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. On his 4th day, Solomon wrote a 6-page analysis of a vulnerability pattern he had found in Aegis 9's public API response headers. It was detailed, precise, and if he was right, it meant the authentication handshake layer had a timing flaw that could be exploited during session token refresh cycles. He sent it to Troy Brennan's inbox with the subject line, "Potential Vulnerability, Aegis 9 API Layer." Troy deleted it without opening it. 20 minutes later, Solomon received a reply, not to his analysis, but to the intern group chat. "Reminder, interns observe, they don't opine. Stay in your lane." Solomon closed his laptop. He picked up the Black Knight from his desk, turned it over in his fingers, and said nothing. The second week was worse. On Monday, a critical Aegis 9 review session was scheduled in the war room, the kind of meeting where senior engineers discussed live threat modeling and system resilience. Solomon checked the calendar. His name was not on the invite. He showed up anyway. Security stopped him at the door. His gray badge flashed red on the scanner. "This area requires silver clearance or above," the guard said. "You're not on the list." Solomon stepped back. Through the glass wall, he could see Troy presenting slides. Slides that contained the same API vulnerability pattern Solomon had emailed about 4 days earlier. Troy was presenting Solomon's own findings, repackaged under his name, with no credit, no mention, no acknowledgement that a 22-year-old intern had found it first. Solomon watched through the glass for 11 minutes. Then he walked back to his cubicle and sat down. Nadine Lawson, a junior developer 2 cubicles over, had seen the whole thing. She walked over and placed a spare phone charger on Solomon's desk. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That wasn't right." Solomon looked at her. "It's fine." "No," Nadine said. "It's not." That was the only act of decency Solomon received in 14 days. On Wednesday of the second week, Grant Whitfield hosted a lunch presentation in the main atrium. 200 employees gathered with plates of catered food while Grant stood at the front and talked about WDI's upcoming Pentagon review. He was electric, confident, commanding, the kind of man who could make you believe a wall was unbreakable just by the way he said the word wall. Midway through, Grant made a joke. He gestured broadly and said, "Our diversity pipeline finally sent us someone. I think he's been doing a great job with the printer." The room laughed. Some people glanced towards Solomon, who was standing near the back wall holding a plate he hadn't touched. He didn't react. But under the table, where no one could see, his hand tightened around the black knight in his pocket until his knuckles ached. Then came demo day. Every intern was given 5 minutes to present a small project. Most presented slide decks, safe, polished, forgettable. When Solomon's turn came, he stood up and presented something no one expected. A working prototype. Not a slide deck, not a concept. A functioning intrusion detection patch that could reduce Aegis 9's threat response time by 340 milliseconds. He had built it on his taped-up laptop on his own time, using only the data available from his gray badge access level. He got 20 seconds in. Grant Whitfield raised his hand from the front row. "Stop!" Solomon stopped. "We don't need patches from someone who's been here 3 weeks. This isn't a hackathon. Sit down." Troy Brennan slow-clapped from the second row. A few people laughed. Not many, but enough. The sound filled the room the way a small crack fills a windshield. Nadine Lawson, sitting near the aisle, closed her eyes like she was trying not to feel what she was feeling. Solomon gathered his laptop. He walked back to his seat. He did not look at anyone. But for the first time since he arrived, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the effort of keeping everything inside, exactly where it was. What no one in that room understood was this. The patch Solomon had built in 20 seconds of presentation was not a student project. It was a solution. And the vulnerability it addressed, the timing flaw in Aegis 9's session token refresh, was not theoretical. It was real. And it was already being exploited. But Solomon couldn't say that. Not yet. Diane Caldwell, Senior Vice President of Engineering, Silver Badge, corner office on the executive floor, had been sitting in the third row during demo day. She didn't laugh. She didn't clap. She watched. And in the 20 seconds before Grant shut Solomon down, she heard him reference a specific CVE exploit chain, a known vulnerability classification, that her own senior team had not flagged in 6 months of internal review. She didn't say anything to Solomon. Not that day. But she pulled up his intern file that evening and stared at it for a long time. A foster kid from Baltimore. A national competition winner at 16. A 6-page vulnerability report that Troy Brennan had deleted without reading. Something didn't add up. And Diane Caldwell was the kind of woman who didn't sleep well when things didn't add up. Man. 900 people in that room, and not one of them opened their mouth. Not one. Now imagine that's you sitting in that chair. You're the only one who looks like you. Everyone's laughing. And the man with all the power just called you a stray. What would you do? But Solomon didn't leave. And what happened next is the reason the Pentagon picked up the phone. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday, 16 days into Solomon's internship, at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon. It started with a sound, a low, steady tone pulsing through the building's speaker system, the kind of sound most employees had never heard before and hoped they never would. Amber lights flashed along the corridor ceilings. Monitors across every floor switched to a single rotating message. Perimeter alert. Aegis 9. Threat level elevated. A ransomware probe had been detected on the outer edge of Aegis 9's defense network. Not a full breach. A ping. A knock on the door. But in a building that protected classified military infrastructure, a knock was enough to trigger full lockdown protocol. Every door sealed, every badge was rescanned, every engineer on the Aegis 9 team dropped what they were doing and moved toward the war room at a pace just short of running. Grant Whitfield arrived in 90 seconds. He burst through the war room door with his jacket off and his sleeves already rolled up. Troy Brennan was at the main terminal, pulling up network traffic logs. Diane Caldwell stood behind him, arms crossed, watching data scroll across 6 screens at once. The room was tight with bodies and tension and the hum of machines working harder than they were designed to. Solomon was not in that room. His gray badge couldn't get him through the door. He didn't try. Instead, he walked calmly back to his cubicle, sat down, and plugged his black USB drive into his taped-up laptop. He opened a custom terminal environment, something he had built himself, something that didn't exist on any commercial platform, and began running his own parallel diagnostic on the alert data that was flowing through WDI's non-classified external channels. Within 4 minutes, he had the answer. The probe wasn't ransomware. It wasn't an external attack at all. The packet timing signature, the rhythm of the data knocking on Aegis 9's door, didn't match any known Eastern European or Asian threat group. The intervals were too clean, too structured, too predictable. Solomon had seen this pattern before. It was a test script, an automated diagnostic tool used by government auditors to verify system responsiveness during a compliance review. Someone on the Pentagon's own audit team had misconfigured their testing tool and accidentally triggered it against the live system instead of the sandbox environment. It was a false alarm, a bureaucratic typo dressed up as a national security threat. Solomon typed a single message on Slack and sent it to the only person in the building who had ever shown him basic respect. Nadine Lawson's screen lit up. Tell them it's not ransomware. It's a recon sweep. Origin is spoofed Eastern European relay, but packet timing matches domestic. Someone on the audit team misconfigured a test script. False alarm.
Nadine stared at the message. She read it twice. Then she stood up, walked to the war room, and knocked. Diane Caldwell opened the door. Nadine showed her the message. Diane read it, paused, then turned to Troy. Pull the audit team's activity logs for the last 40 minutes. Troy frowned. Why? Just do it. He did. And Solomon was right. Every word. The probe was traced back to an auditor's laptop running a misconfigured diagnostic script. False alarm. No breach. No threat. No enemy at the gate. Just a government contractor who clicked the wrong button. The lockdown was lifted within the hour. Grant Whitfield sent a company-wide email taking full credit for swiftly identifying and neutralizing the incident. Solomon's name appeared nowhere. Troy sent a follow-up reminder to interns about staying in their lane during security events. But Diane Caldwell did not go back to her office. She walked to Solomon's cubicle. She looked at his screen,
the custom terminal, the diagnostic output, the analysis that her entire senior team had failed to produce in the time it took Solomon to type a Slack message. She saw code running in an environment she had never encountered in 20 years of cybersecurity work. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked. Solomon looked up. "I taught myself."
Diane didn't believe him. But she didn't walk away either. She stood there for a long moment, studying his face the way she had studied his code, looking for something that didn't add up. Then she nodded once and left without another word. That night, Solomon sat alone in his studio apartment. A mattress on the floor, a folding table, nothing on the walls. He held the black knight chess piece in his palm and turned it over slowly. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Ruth's voice said what it always said. "The knight jumps over walls, baby. That's what makes it dangerous." Outside his window, Arlington glowed with the lights of buildings full of people who still had no idea who Solomon Mitchell was. But one person was beginning to wonder. And wondering, in a place like Whitfield Digital Industries, was the most dangerous thing of all. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, the last day of Solomon's third week. Grant Whitfield had called it personally. 900 employees packed the main auditorium, filling every seat and lining the walls too deep. The energy in the room was electric. Word had spread that the Pentagon's final certification review of Aegis 9 was less than 10 days away. If the system passed, WDI would secure the largest single defense contract renewal in the history of American cybersecurity. $2.1 billion. Grant's name cemented in history. His legacy made permanent. Grant took the stage like a man who had already won. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his sleeves rolled to the forearms, his signature look, the one from the magazine covers. He gripped the microphone with the ease of someone who had never once been told he was wrong in his own building. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "in 9 days the Department of Defense will conduct their final review of Aegis 9. And when they do, they will find exactly what every red team in the country has already found. Nothing. No breach, no weakness, no crack in the wall." He paused. Let the silence do the work. Because this system is not just good, it is perfect. And perfection does not break. The room erupted. Applause, standing ovation from the front rows. Troy Brennan clapped the loudest, gold badge catching the stage light like a medal. Solomon sat in the last row, gray badge, same thrift store shirt, same taped-up laptop bag under his seat. He had listened to every word, and when the applause faded and Grant opened the floor for questions, Solomon raised his hand. The room didn't notice at first. A gray badge in the back row was furniture, invisible by design. But Diane Caldwell, sitting in the fourth row, saw it. She turned around, and then the person next to her turned, and then the row in front. One by one, heads swiveled toward the back of the auditorium like dominoes falling in slow motion. Grant noticed the shift. He squinted toward the back. When he saw who it was, his expression moved through 3 phases in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, amusement. "Well," he said into the microphone, leaning forward with a grin that was half showman, half predator. "The coffee kid has a question." Solomon stood up. His voice was calm, level, and carried clearly without amplification. "Mr. Whitfield, I've spent 3 weeks reviewing every piece of publicly available documentation on Aegis 9's architecture. The authentication handshake layer has at least 3 exploitable vectors. The session token refresh cycle has a timing flaw that can be triggered through a custom injection sequence. And your TLS renegotiation protocol has a gap wide enough to drive a truck through." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it.
the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own breathing. Then Troy Brennan laughed. Loud, deliberate, from the second row. The coffee kid thinks he found a hole in a $2 billion system. A few people laughed with him. Not many, but enough. Grant tilted his head. He studied Solomon the way a cat studies something small that just moved. And in that moment, a decision was made. Not a rational one, not a strategic one, but the kind of decision that only a man who has never been publicly challenged in his own kingdom would make. Grant's ego stepped forward. His judgment stepped back. And the words came out before the smarter part of his brain could stop them.
"You know what?" Grant said, his voice rising for the crowd. "Somebody get this stray a terminal." He spread his arms wide. "Hack this system, right here, right now, in front of every single person in this room." He paused, letting the drama build, feeding off the energy of 900 people who were already leaning forward in their seats. "And if you crack it, I'll sign over my whole damn company." The room buzzed. People whispered. Phones came out. Troy Brennan leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, and a smirk that said this was already over. A workstation was wheeled onto the stage. The main projection screen lit up with Aegis 9's sandbox environment, a live mirror of the actual defense system, identical in every way except that it wasn't connected to classified military networks. The cursor blinked on a dark screen, waiting. Solomon walked to the stage. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. 900 pairs of eyes tracked him the way an audience tracks a man walking to the edge of a cliff. He sat down at the workstation, removed the black USB drive from his lanyard, the same one every coworker had dismissed as a music stick, the same one Troy had joked about in the break room, the same one that held a custom-built penetration suite Solomon had coded himself over 6 years. He plugged it in. Before his fingers touched the keyboard, he looked up at Grant Whitfield, the first time in 3 weeks that Solomon had held direct, unbroken eye contact with the man who owned the building, the system, and every person in it. "You should know," Solomon said quietly, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I'm not doing this to embarrass you. I'm doing this because people's lives depend on this system actually working." Grant smirked. 11 minutes to prove the whole world wrong. Clock's ticking, kid. Solomon turned to the screen. His fingers found the keys. And he began. The room watched. The projection screen filled with scrolling code. Fast, precise, deliberate. Solomon's keystrokes had a rhythm to them, steady and unhesitating, like a pianist playing a piece he had memorized so deeply it lived in his muscles, not his mind. He initiated a custom handshake injection targeting Aegis 9's TLS renegotiation sequence. He exploited the timing vulnerability in the session token refresh cycle, the exact flaw he had written about in the 6-page report Troy deleted without reading. Layer by layer, Aegis 9 opened. Authentication bypassed. Internal routing tables exposed. Encrypted database headers unlocked. Each layer peeling away like skin from a fruit, clean and irreversible. The room's energy shifted. People stopped whispering. Troy uncrossed his arms. Diane Caldwell stood up from her seat. On screen, the progress bar of Solomon's penetration suite climbed. 60%, 70%, 80%, and with every increment, the silence in the room grew heavier, thicker, harder to breathe through. Grant Whitfield's smirk was gone. His face was pale. He stepped toward the workstation and said, "That's enough. Stop." Solomon didn't stop. Grant's voice cracked. "I said stop!" Solomon's fingers kept moving, and 900 people watched a 22-year-old intern do what every red team in the country had failed to do.
Break the wall that could not be broken. 11 minutes and 14 seconds.
That's how long it took. Not an hour, not a day, not the 6 months Grant Whitfield's own senior team had spent assuring him the system was untouchable. 11 minutes and 14 seconds from the moment Solomon's fingers touched the keyboard to the moment he pressed enter one final time. Every screen in the auditorium went black. 900 people held their breath. Some stood. Some grabbed the person next to them. The projection screen on stage, the one that had been displaying Aegis 9's proud, layered architecture like a cathedral of code, flickered once, twice, then resolved to a single line of text, green font on black background. 2 words and a name. Aegis 9. Breach complete. All nodes compromised. Nightfall. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so thick you could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents 3 floors up. Solomon unplugged his USB drive, placed it back on his lanyard, stood up from the workstation, and turned toward the audience, not with triumph, not with arrogance, but with the quiet, steady expression of a man who had done exactly what he came to do. Grant Whitfield's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands were shaking. He looked at the screen, then at Solomon, then at the screen again, like a man watching his house burn and still not believing it was on fire. Then something broke inside him. Not sadness, not humility. Rage. "Security!" Grant's voice cracked across the auditorium like a gunshot. "Get him out of here, now! This is sabotage. This is a criminal act. Someone call legal. I want this kid arrested before he reaches the parking lot." 2 security guards moved toward Solomon. Troy Brennan was already on the phone, his face white, barking instructions at the legal department. The auditorium erupted into chaos. People standing, talking over each other, some filming on their phones, others heading for the exits like the building itself might collapse. Solomon didn't resist. He didn't run. He let the guards take his arms, and as they walked him toward the door, he looked back at Grant one last time. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The Black Knight had jumped the wall. And the wall was in pieces. That night, Grant didn't sleep. He sat in his office with the lights off, staring at his phone, waiting for the legal team to confirm charges had been filed. He told himself this was sabotage, an inside attack, a disgruntled intern with a grudge and a stolen tool set. He told himself the system was fine, that what Solomon had done was a trick, a stunt, something that could be explained away and patched by morning. He told himself he was still right. He was still telling himself that at 5:47 the next morning, when his phone rang. Blocked number. "Mr. Whitfield, this is Colonel Harold Price, United States Department of Defense, Cyber Command Division." Grant sat up straight. "Colonel, I was going to call your office this morning. We had an incident yesterday. An intern accessed our system without I know exactly what happened, Mr. Whitfield. That's why I'm calling." Price's voice was flat, military precise, stripped of warmth. "Solomon Mitchell, the young man you had escorted out of your building last night, is Operative Nightfall. He is a member of Unit 91, our classified Cyber Red team. He was placed inside your organization at our direction to conduct a live environment penetration assessment of Aegis 9 before final contract certification." The room tilted. Grant pressed his hand against the desk to steady himself. That's not possible. He's an intern. He's 22 years old. He is 22. He is also the youngest operative ever admitted to Unit 91. His previous record for a Tier 1 defense system breach was 18 minutes. Last night, he broke his own record. Price paused, the kind of pause that carries the weight of what comes next. "Mr. Whitfield, your system failed.
The contract review is suspended, effective immediately. You will receive formal notice by 0900. The line went dead. Grant Whitfield sat in the dark, the phone still pressed against his ear, the city of Arlington beginning to glow through his office window. And somewhere out there, in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a chess piece on a folding table, Solomon Mitchell was already awake, already working, because the breach was only the beginning of what he had found inside Aegis 9. And what he had found was far worse than a broken wall. The news broke before the sun was fully up. WDI's stock dropped 31% in pre-market trading. By 8 o'clock, every financial outlet in the country had the same headline. Whitfield Digital Industries' flagship defense system breached by Intern. Pentagon suspends $2.1 billion contract. By 9 o'clock, Grant Whitfield's name was trending. Not the way it used to trend. Not Forbes covers. Not keynote invitations. Not glowing profiles about the man who built a wall the world couldn't break. This time, it was different.
This time the wall was rubble, and 900 employees had watched it happen. Grant's board of directors held an emergency call at 7:15. 8 voices on the line, none of them friendly. The chairman, a 70-year-old defense industry veteran named Arthur Caldwell, no relation to Diane, told Grant in plain language that the board expected a public statement within the hour and a full internal investigation within the week. Grant promised both. Then he hung up and did something far more dangerous. He called a press contact at a major news network. And he lied. The statement went out at 8:40. Whitfield Digital Industries experienced an unauthorized sabotage event carried out by a rogue intern acting outside the scope of his employment. The individual has been terminated and referred to law enforcement. Aegis 9 remains fully operational and secure. Every word was calculated. Every word was wrong. But Grant didn't know the worst part yet. Because while he was busy protecting his ego, the Pentagon was dealing with something far more serious than a failed stress test. Colonel Harold Price called Solomon at 6:12 that morning. Solomon was already awake, sitting cross-legged on his mattress, his laptop open, his eyes locked on a string of code he had copied from Aegis 9's deep architecture during the 11-minute breach. Something had been bothering him since the moment he cracked the system. A shadow in the data. A pattern that shouldn't have been there. A whisper hiding under all the noise. "Mitchell, we have a problem," Price said. No greeting, no small talk. Military voice. "I know," Solomon replied. "I found it during the breach. There's a dormant back door embedded in Aegis 9's firmware update layer. It wasn't part of the original architecture. Someone planted it, and it's been there for months." The line went quiet for 3 seconds. In military communication, 3 seconds of silence is an eternity. "How bad?" Price asked. "If you had certified Aegis 9 and deployed it across active military networks, whoever planted this would have had remote access to classified infrastructure at 14 bases. Communications, logistics, weapons coordination, all of it. Wide open." Another silence. Then, "How long do we have before they know we've found it?" Solomon had already calculated this. The back door was designed with an automated check-in protocol, a tiny ping sent to an external server every 6 hours to confirm the access point was still active. The last check-in had occurred at 2 in the morning. The next one was scheduled for 8. If the back door pinged and found the system altered, locked, or monitored, the threat actor would know they had been discovered and could trigger an emergency data exfiltration protocol to extract whatever classified material they could grab before the door closed. 6 hours from the last ping, Solomon said. That gives us until 8 tonight. But if I were them, I'd build in an early trigger. I'd assume 5. Then you have 5 hours. I'm sending a team to WDI now. You'll lead the operation. Solomon paused.
"Colonel, they threw me out of the building last night. They won't this morning." At 7:45, a black SUV pulled up to Whitfield Digital Industries. Solomon Mitchell stepped out, but not the way he had arrived 3 weeks ago. No Greyhound bus, no second-hand backpack, no gray badge. He was flanked by 2 uniformed military officers and a civilian DoD liaison carrying a briefcase with the Department of Defense seal stamped on the leather. Solomon wore the same thrift store shirt, the same taped-up laptop bag, but around his neck hung a new lanyard, red, with a clearance level that made every badge in the building obsolete. The receptionist, who had mistaken him for a delivery driver on his first day, watched him walk past without a word. The security guards, who had escorted him out 12 hours ago, stepped aside. The glass doors to the war room, the ones his gray badge could never open, parted for him automatically.
Troy Brennan was inside. He saw Solomon enter. His face went white, then red, then a color that didn't have a name. He opened his mouth to say something, but the military officer behind Solomon spoke first. "Everyone in this room now reports to Operative Mitchell. Questions go through Colonel Price." Troy closed his mouth.
Diane Caldwell was already there. She stood by the main terminal, arms crossed, waiting. When Solomon approached, she did something she had never done in 20 years at WDI. She stepped aside and offered him her chair. "It's yours," she said quietly. "It should have been yours 3 weeks ago." Solomon sat down. 5 hours. 14 military bases at risk. A ghost hiding inside $2 billion of code. And the only person in the country who could find it was the kid they had called a stray. He plugged in the black USB drive and got to work. The operation unfolded in layers. First, Solomon mapped the backdoor's exact location, buried inside a routine firmware update that had been pushed to Aegis 9 4 months earlier. The update had passed every internal security review because it was disguised as a standard vendor patch. Someone on WDI's own supply chain, a third-party contractor with firmware access, had injected the malicious payload into a legitimate update. It was the digital equivalent of hiding a bomb inside a medicine bottle. Clean, professional, almost invisible. Almost. Solomon reverse-engineered the malware payload, a custom rootkit designed to remain dormant until activated by the external check-in ping. He traced the communication pathway through 3 layers of encrypted proxies, peeling each one back like skin from a wire. Diane's team fed him data. The DoD analysts cross-referenced his findings in real time. The room was silent, except for the sound of keyboards and the low hum of servers working at capacity. At hour 3, Solomon found the contractor. A small firmware vendor based in Northern Virginia with DoD clearance and a clean record, except for one employee who had been quietly wiring payments to an offshore account in Cyprus for the past 11 months. The forensic trail was thin, but real, enough to hand off to intelligence agencies, enough to start pulling threads. At hour 4, Solomon hit a wall. The backdoor's check-in protocol had shifted. The ping came early, 2 hours ahead of schedule. Alarms lit up across every screen in the war room. The threat actor knew something was wrong. Maybe they had a secondary monitoring system. Maybe they had gotten lucky. It didn't matter. The clock had just been cut in half. Solomon's fingers moved across 2 keyboards simultaneously. His left hand isolated the compromised node, quarantining it from the rest of Aegis 9's network. His right hand deployed a counterfeit handshake, a fake response designed to fool the external server into believing the backdoor was still active and untouched. It was a bluff, a digital lie, and it had to be perfect, because if the threat actor detected the deception, they would trigger the exfiltration protocol and pull every piece of classified data they could reach before Solomon could shut the door. Sweat ran down Solomon's temples. Colonel Price was on a secure line in his ear, coordinating with NSA analysts at Fort Meade. Diane stood behind Solomon, watching his screen, her hand gripping the back of his chair. Troy Brennan sat 2 terminals away, running the support tasks Solomon had assigned him, following orders from the intern he had told to fetch coffee 16 days ago. The counterfeit handshake held.
The external server accepted the fake response. The threat actor didn't trigger the exfiltration. Solomon had bought himself 30 more minutes. And in those 30 minutes, he did what no one else in the building could do. He extracted the full forensic signature of the back door, sealed the compromised firmware layer, deployed a clean patch across every node in Aegis 9's network, and locked the door so thoroughly that even he couldn't open it again.
When it was done, Solomon leaned back in his chair. His hands were still. His eyes were closed. The war room was quiet. On every screen, a single status message glowed green. Aegis 9. All nodes secured. Threat neutralized. Diane Caldwell exhaled, like she had been holding her breath for 5 hours. Colonel Price's voice came through the secure line. Confirmed. Backdoor neutralized. Forensic package received. Outstanding work, Operative.
Solomon opened his eyes. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he said quietly, to no one in particular, "The wall didn't fall because I pushed it. It fell because no one checked the foundation." Grant Whitfield had been watching from the observation room the entire time. 5 hours. Through the glass, he had seen Solomon command the room, his engineers deferring to a 22-year-old, his systems being rebuilt by the hands of the man he had called a stray. And in the final hour, when the early ping triggered and alarms filled the war room, Grant saw something on Solomon's screen that stopped his breath. The compromised firmware update. The backdoor's entry point. The exact vulnerability that Solomon had tried to present at demo day. The patch Solomon built. The presentation Grant shut down after 20 seconds. If Grant had listened, just listened, that back door would have been found 4 months ago. His ego didn't just humiliate an intern. It nearly handed America's classified defense network to an enemy that was already inside the house. Grant sat alone in the observation room for a long time after the screens went green. He didn't move. He didn't speak. And for the first time in his adult life, Grant Whitfield had nothing to say. 72 hours later, the Pentagon completed its review. The results were classified, but the outcome was not. Aegis 9 would be rebuilt, not patched, not updated, not adjusted. Rebuilt from the ground up using a new security architecture. And the blueprint for that architecture was based on the work of one person, Solomon Mitchell. His intrusion detection patch, the one Grant Whitfield had silenced after 20 seconds at demo day, became the foundation of the redesigned system. The 340 millisecond improvement Solomon had built on a taped-up laptop in a cubicle next to the supply closet was now embedded in the core of America's most critical cyber defense network. The contract was reinstated. Conditionally. The Pentagon appointed a permanent DoD oversight team to monitor WDI's rebuild process. The days of Grant Whitfield answering to no one were over. On Thursday morning, Solomon stood in a windowless room deep inside the Pentagon. No cameras, no press, no audience. Just Colonel Harold Price, 2 senior officials from Cyber Command, and a flag on the wall. Price pinned a commendation to Solomon's chest, a small metal bar that carried no public record, but meant everything to the people in that room. Price shook Solomon's hand and held it. Most operatives take years to prove themselves.
You proved yourself before anyone even knew you were in the room. Solomon looked at the commendation. He thought about Ruth, about the raspberry pie from the pawn shop, about the chess piece in his pocket. He nodded once and said, "I had a good teacher."
That same afternoon, Diane Caldwell called Solomon. Not through official channels, not through the DoD liaison. She called his personal phone, the prepaid one he had bought at a gas station his first day in Arlington. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not for what I did, for what I didn't do. I saw it, Solomon. I saw what was happening to you, and I stayed quiet." Her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "That won't happen again." Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were the only one who looked at my code. That mattered more than you know." The board voted on Monday morning, 8-2. Grant Whitfield was removed as CEO of the company he built from a garage. 23 years of work undone in 15 minutes. The public statement called it a resignation. Everyone knew it was a firing. His press statement, calling Solomon a rogue intern, collapsed within 48 hours. The Department of Defense released a redacted summary confirming the penetration test was fully authorized. Every word Grant had told the press was a lie. Congressional investigators opened an inquiry into why known vulnerability reports had been buried internally. Troy Brennan's deleted email was recovered. Solomon's 6-page analysis that identified the exact flaw the backdoor exploited. Troy was terminated the same week. His gold badge didn't follow him out the door. Diane Caldwell was appointed interim CTO. Her first act? Eliminate the badge tier system. No more gray, silver, gold. One badge, one level of respect. Her second act? An internal channel where any employee could flag security concerns directly to the CTO without passing through a manager. She named it the Mitchell Protocol. Nadine Lawson was promoted to senior engineer. Solomon personally recommended her to Colonel Price's civilian recruitment pipeline. Solomon declined every private sector offer that came in, each one worth more than Ruth Mitchell earned in her entire life. He accepted a full-time role with Unit 91 and began building something that had never existed, a training pipeline for young people from foster care and underserved communities to enter cybersecurity. Free tuition, full mentorship, real placement. He named it Knight's Move. On a Saturday morning, Solomon drove to Baltimore. He walked through a cemetery he hadn't visited in 6 years. Found Ruth's headstone. Simple, small, just her name and 2 dates. He knelt down and placed the black knight chess piece on top of the stone. "I jumped over the wall, Mama. Just like you said." He stayed there for a long time. And somewhere in Arlington, a building full of engineers was learning what Ruth Mitchell had always known. The quietest piece on the board is the one that changes the whole game. 900 people in that room. 900 educated, credentialed, well-paid professionals. And not one of them saw what was right in front of their faces. Not because Solomon was hiding. He wasn't. He showed up every single day. He wrote the report. He built the patch. He raised his hand. He stood up when everyone expected him to sit down. He did everything right. And they still looked through him like he was glass. That's the thing about arrogance. It doesn't just blind you to what's coming. It blinds you to what's already there. Grant Whitfield didn't lose his company because Solomon was smarter than him. He lost it because he decided, the moment he saw a black kid in a thrift store shirt with a gray badge, that Solomon had nothing to offer. He made that decision in less than a second. And he spent 3 weeks reinforcing it.
Every joke, every dismissal, every turned back, every deleted email. Each one was a brick in a wall Grant built around his own judgment. And when that wall finally came down, it didn't just take his company. It took everything. The most dangerous system failure isn't a line of bad code. It's the arrogance that refuses to listen. Solomon Mitchell didn't walk into Whitfield Digital Industries to prove anyone wrong. He walked in to do a job. The fact that he had to endure what he endured just to be allowed to do it, that's not his failure. That's ours. Every day, in every industry, in every room where power sits at the front and everyone else sits in the back, there is someone like Solomon. Someone who sees the flaw. Someone who has the fix. Someone whose hand is raised and whose voice is ready. The only question is whether the people in charge are brave enough to listen or too proud to try. If this story reminded you of someone who was underestimated, someone who was told they didn't belong, that they weren't bred for it, that they should get back to their kennel, share it with them. Sometimes the only thing that keeps a person going is knowing that someone else sees them. Man, how many Solomons are out there right now? Brilliant, ready, invisible. Talent that nobody sees because they already decided what it looks like. Now imagine that's your kid, your brother, you. Still think it doesn't matter? Like, share, and subscribe, because this story isn't over.